So good day, friends. This is Dr. Bob Hamilton, and you have tuned in today to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Before we start, I want to say thank you for tuning in. It means a lot to me. I know each of you out there who tune in are busy people, your parents, grandparents, everything, aunts and uncles. You're busy trying to raise families, trying to survive in our world, and it means a lot. If by the fact that you tune in means a lot to me. So thank you. If you like what you hear, please pass it on to your friends, your family. We're building an audience, and the reason we want to build an audience is not for Dr. Bob, it's because I bring amazing people to the table, to the airways, to the Zoom world or the the digital world on a weekly basis. And today, it is a great pleasure to welcome author Timothy Carney to my podcast. Mr. Carney, thank you for being here today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So it is a great pleasure for me to have you. So Tim Carney just wrote a book which was reviewed in the Wall Street Journal. It's called Family Unfriendly. The subtitle is How Our Culture Made Raising Kids Much Harder Than It Needs to Be. This is a very provocative title, which caught my attention, obviously, because I'm in the business of kids and seeing kids raised to be good people. So, Tim Carney, just so you know, he is a father of 6 children, which endeared him to me because we are both fathers of 6 children. By the way, we are rare people in this world. So, Tim, you already are distinguished in my mind. He's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and a columnist at the Washington Examiner newspaper. He and his wife, Katie, now live in Northern Virginia. And he grew up with 3 older brothers in Greenwich Village and later in New York. He's also the author of Alienated America, which is another book, other books as well, but this is kind of as he calls it, a prequel to his new book, Family Unfriendly. Tim Carney, you're an accomplished guy. You've done a lot.
I keep busy.
You do keep
Oh,
busy, and
yeah.
you certainly got a lot going on. So before we get into your book and talk about the things that you talk about, I'd like my guests to give us a little background. Tell us a little bit about
Sure.
your life, where you grew up, the kind of life you lived, and just why you're doing what you're doing today.
Yeah.
You got a lot going on, and why you're writing books like Family Unfriendly.
So thank you. And thanks again for having me. I grew up, as you mentioned, first in Manhattan and then in the suburbs of New York City, with 3 older brothers. And having 3 older brothers within a few years of me, at one point, 3 of us were in high school at the same time.
Wow.
And the oldest one was just about 2 years older than that. So we were just that was the habitat of my childhood, was having these brothers. We would go to the park together across the street when we lived in the city. We shared friends. I guess we shared girlfriends, and that could get complicated. But we were brought
Oh,
up.
I don't recommend that, you guys, to my listeners.
No, no.
So
Yeah, if you look
maybe
at my
sequentially, but not at the same time. Put it that way.
no, and not at the same time, thankfully. But if you look at some of the prom pictures of some of my brothers, you'll notice my sister-in-law with the wrong brother. But that gets complicated when you have brothers in close age range. And we grew up, and I went off to St. John's College, a great book school where everybody reads the same thing. Like, you study math by reading Euclid and Newton, and you read a lot of philosophy. And I graduated from there. Eventually, realized I needed a job. Landed in D.C. and started doing political journalism. And over time, being in Washington D.C., well, first of all, in that period, shortly after college, I became a Catholic. I was raised non-practicing Catholic, is how I describe it. An Irish family. We were baptized. We didn't go to church, and started a fellowship at the American Enterprise Institute, first working on sort of economic policy issues, but then broadening into cultural issues. And Alienated America, which you mentioned, that was a book I came out in 2019 explaining why so many people think the American dream is dead. And the answer is community. that where the American dream is alive, people know their neighbors, they go to church, they say hi to their neighbors at the local diner, they volunteer. Where the American dream seems dead, economics is part of it, but the heart of the story is the loss of connection, loss of belonging. And the
Yeah.
most important thing to flow out of that is the retreat from marriage and the collapse in the birth rate in the United States. As I told you, I grew up a tight knit family, 4 kids, and my wife grew up in a family. She had 7 siblings. She was number 4 out of 8. We got married relatively young, for, well, about normal for 20 years ago, in mid to late 20s, and had babies right away, had 6 kids. I always knew I wanted a big family. And we have immersed ourselves in a subculture. We have tons of friends who are similar, next door neighbors who found us this house. They have either 5 or 6 kids. I don't even know, because they're very fast. I haven't been able to nail it down, and we have a ton of that. So that's the world I live in. So seeing a broader family unfriendly culture, but also benefiting from family friendly subcultures that are connected to our church and our neighborhood and my wife's family, that drove me to write this book.
Yeah. No, I think that is very interesting. You basically have created your own little bubble in the world, and it's enviable. The fact that you have it sounds very 1950s to me, not 2024-ish to me. And I think that one of the, of course, you have actually created a little bit of a bubble in your own family. Your kids have got siblings, obviously, relationships, and you actually mentioned during the pandemic, you guys kind of thrived because you had created your own little subculture within your family. Um, I have so many questions for you that are, I think, are relevant to your book. But I want to kind of go back a little bit and ask you. So that's why you wrote the book. You are living this very rich and very fulfilling life within your community, within your own family, and you look out on the broader landscape of the country right now, and you're seeing a very different, maybe nihilistic, a little bit, obviously very pessimistic and sadder country, at least portrayed by the media. But your whole thing, I guess, comes down to community and family. But I want you to, and so that was the reason you wrote the book, correct?
Correct.
So I want to ask you a couple of questions. Number one, why has this happened? I mean, you make a statement in your preface. You say America has become a family unfriendly culture. Can you elucidate that thought?
Sure. I emphasize the word culture because I think economics doesn't explain these problems. And the collapse in the birth rate, the retreat from marriage, the rising childhood anxiety, I don't think they're primarily explained by economics. Economics plays a role. We can talk about house prices later, but uh, that the cultural issues are at the root of this problem. Children are not more unaffordable than they used to be, except for some cultural things. So parenting culture is out of control. We've replaced local little league with high stakes, high costs, super intense, expensive travel sports, helicoptering, a fear that there's something, that there's a kidnapper around every corner. So irrational fears combined with rational fears about the internet and social media and that sort of thing. Dating and mating culture are broken too. People don't get married in their 20s. Some of it is people staying in school longer, more education. Some of it is, I think, the dating apps and frankly our anthropology have messed stuff up. The idea of sacrificing, of surrendering, of all the things that are involved with giving up your autonomy, involved with relationships. I think that those have gotten broken a little bit. And finally, the values of our culture are not aligned with marriage and family formation. Again, laying down your life for another person, that's not being the greatest you can be in some people's mind. That's not autonomy. We're a very individualistic culture. We're a materialistic culture. And if you are looking out for number one and you care about sort of career and worldly success, you can see marriage and children as obstacles to that. So in all
Yeah.
those ways, our culture deters marriage and family formation and makes childhood more anxious.
So well spoken. You're absolutely true. I mean, I think the idea of laying down your life, even those words, I'm hearing these words, and I'm thinking laying down your life. I mean, for many, many people, that seems like you're inviting slavery, so, being a slave or
Yeah.
something. And of course, that's the very opposite. I think that obviously marriage, to a degree, is you're giving up a lot of you have to accommodate another human being in your life, and that can mean holding your tongue. That can mean not going to where you want to go that night, not playing, cards with the
Mhm.
guys. It may mean going out to dinner with people you don't maybe want to go out to dinner with, or whatever it may be. There's a lot of aspects of that, but the fulfillment of that, and talk about that, the fulfillment of these things. Why is this a good thing for people, especially for men?
Well, yeah. So for one thing, just it's in our nature. I mean, Aristotle says man is a political animal. That word political could be translated sometimes as social. That we really are meant to be. The recipe for our ultimate long term happiness involves relations with others. So close friendships, and all that stuff. Not just having buddies, but having people that we really share our lives with. That really matters. And marriage is sort of the perfect formulation. Marriage, where together you raise children, is the in a home. This is this magic formulation where you have dearly close friends, and then you have these people you have to look out for who years later, I'm starting to get to that phase where they become your friends. You've reached that phase with grown children, but that's almost it's handed to you on a platter that so we are happier when we are living for others, and part of that is just that we're kind of selfish creatures. And that's the thing. People say, oh, well, we're getting more selfish, that's why nobody has kids. I don't think that's true at all. I think if I made a selfishness graph, it would start at like it starts at 0, shoots to 100 when Adam and Eve eat the apple, and then historically it's been at 100 ever since then. But what we
Yeah.
do is we build cultures and civilizations to offset the selfishness, to steer the self-interest towards the common good, to try to align people's short-term desires with their long-term good. And so that's again why I think our culture is failing. It's not doing that aligning. So it just is human nature that we're happier when we're living for and with others and sharing our lives with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I love that. You're absolutely right. I don't think that this is a new thing that we're getting more selfish. I think it's been always there. It's part of the nature of human beings. And it's becoming maybe easier to be more selfish, I suppose, in some ways. But I think that you need to be starting getting married, definitely having children too. You are shaken out of that selfishness, and you have no choice but to commit your. I mean, certainly when you have kids, and I like as a pediatrician, I can tell you that mommies, when they have children, literally go nuts for their kids. I one of the questions I'd like to ask in my office, Tim, is I look at moms of these new babies and I ask them, I said, do you by the way, do you love your baby? And they look at me like, do I love my baby? I will die in 1,000 deaths for this child. And by the way, they met their child the day before yesterday. And
Yeah.
so it's one of these. It's a beautiful thing, and I think that that takes you out of yourself. And to a degree, you have to kind of look in the rearview mirror to realize how much you have changed. It's a beautiful thing. Okay, I want to get into your book because your book really does throw out a lot of ideas, which I think are fascinating to me. The one I love your chapter. We'll start with your chapter, which you entitled "Lower Ambitions for Your Kids." Now, that seems to be anti-cultural, my friend. Let me say that again. Lower, Lower, lower ambitions for our kids. Would you please explain this to my West Side Los Angeles listeners?
Sure. Even if your child, first of all, your child is probably not going to be a professional tennis player or a professional violinist. And even if he or she were, that's probably not the best thing for them. And you don't know the right way, the best way to do it. The expensive lessons you're giving them, et cetera, might not be the right way to do it. The specialization, the giving up all the other aspects of childhood. are not good for kids. And so parents are often over specializing their children or letting their children choose to over specialize. Oh, it's just their choice. Well, kids, 12-year-olds make a lot of bad choices. The point of youth sports is not a D1 scholarship. And I'll be even a little more extreme here. High school, the purpose of high school is not getting into college. The purpose of high school is a great step on the journey of formation of becoming an adult. It's for its own sake. What you learn, what you do, how you learn to deal with other people, all of that, how you learn to make friends, how you learn to deal with bad teachers, all of that stuff, that's its own purpose. It's not like minor league baseball, which is, I guess, just a step. That's even selling short minor league baseball. Minor league baseball is great. It's not like preseason baseball, which is for the sake of the preseason. It's its own thing. Parents miss that, and they think the purpose of these school sports, music, is achievement rather than the beauty of the learning of athletics, of music in and of themselves, and virtue. That's what these things are really about. And so
Hold
there's
on,
this one
hold on.
kid.
Did you say virtue? Did you say that word virtue?
Yes, virtue.
I want to, okay,
Uh,
because that's an uncommon word. Tell us why these things are bring virtue to life.
well, I mean, I'll sound like your old little league coach or your Boy Scout troop coach, but ask yourself if I sound like your kids coach when I say this. The purpose of youth sports is to teach you how to work hard, how to be a teammate, how to sacrifice for others, how to be a leader, how to win with grace, how to lose with grace, how to come back, how to put in perspective what matters. And if you lose every game or win every game or lead the league in hitting or never get a hit, all of those things are all secondary to the actual pursuit of growing to be a better person. Virtue being habits that are aligned with human nature. That they're what make you the habits that make you happy in the long run, not pleasure in the short term, but happy in the long run. Those are the virtues. And you know what they are. Their patience, their fortitude, their courage, their honesty, etc. Sports, music, whatever activities you're doing, that's the point of them.
Yeah,
That's their purpose. Now you got to be trying to win or you won't get those. If you just show up and say, "Today I'll develop my courage," you're probably not going to do it. But if you say, I want to be the guy who's going in with the bases loaded and nobody out in the last inning to pitch." That's what's going to develop your courage. And so your ambitions for your kids should be, again, not low. That's sort of a tongue in cheek, lower ambition, but like lower than D1, like maybe JV or something. I had this one dad, his son, he was a baseball dad. And then he's told me, he's like, this is his last year playing baseball. He's going to lacrosse. And I thought that's sad because in my mind, baseball is much more fun than lacrosse. And then he says, yeah, 8 years of baseball down the drain. And I thought, no, the purpose of those 8 years of baseball was not the next 8 years of baseball. It was those 8 years of baseball. It was beautiful because it was beautiful. And so
yeah.
that idea that the ambitions can be something beyond achievement, that needs to be pounded into the head of not just the upper middle class and the upper class in the US, but the high achievement parenting is trickling down to the middle class as well.
You mentioned specialization in sports, and as a pediatrician and thinking about
Hmm.
the way kids develop and everything, I am a big believer in non-specialization. I tell parents, please don't make your kid do one sport all the time. It's not good for their body. You mentioned a guy, apparently an acquaintance you knew, a guy named Pete, and I can't pronounce his last name. How do you Pete
Zacalillo.
Zacalolo? Um,
Zacalillo.
Okay, I'll let you
We
say it.
just call them Zoc. Call him Zoc. That's what we call him.
Zach. Tell us about Zach.
So Pete Zacalillo, so I got to play baseball with him, which tells
Oh,
you how different it was because I was not very good, and he became a major leaguer. He wasn't a star. He played one fall in the majors. He was the best baseball player in my high school. He was the best basketball player in my high school, and he was one of the three best soccer players in my high school. And when he didn't play soccer his senior year, the county paper ran that as like the headline on their profile of our team. But I think back on that, and that of course upset all my buddies who were still playing soccer. But I think back at it, it was noteworthy back in the 1990s that a guy who was going to go pro in baseball was quitting his number 3 sport at age 18. Nowadays, I see 12-year-olds being told by their coaches, "Look, I know you like soccer, but you gotta quit it. You gotta play baseball spring, summer, fall, and then show up for winter workouts in January." And so that push to specialization starts younger and younger every year. It started at 17, 18 in suburban New York when I was a kid, and only for the top tier athletes. Otherwise, nobody was sold, "Oh, you really gotta work on this." And so part of the crime though is now Pete, he started a business coaching kids in baseball. And when he expects the kids to be done after, a summer training camp, they're like, "Well, what can we do in the fall?" And he has to tell the parents, "Go
Mm.
for a hike, do something. You're gonna throw out your arm if you're trying to pitch." He's like, "Okay, should I do a weightlifting regimen? Fine, but like, it's not all about specialization." And again, he he made it to the majors. He got a few at bats.
Yeah. So
His
I
life now is raising a family. It's not. Yeah. Sorry. Go on.
no, no, I love what you're saying. You mentioned the whole idea of, and he mentioned, and maybe this is a quote I think you said, it's rare to see three sport kids anymore, and I think that's true.
Yep. And it's got to do with this idea of special, even on positions. I found myself as a dad thinking when my oldest was like 11, I was like, oh, he's a little slow, but he's got a strong arm. His high school field has a short right field. Let's put him in. And some dad was like, you are overthinking this. He's 11. You have no idea. Last summer, he played all 9 positions. Now he's settling into being an outfielder. You have no idea what's going to happen in your kid's life. Stop trying to plan it. And so give them an expansive childhood. So that's one of the things I focus on is this music teacher who told me that she got asked, is your dream seeing your kids perform on stage at the Kennedy Center, Carnegie Hall, etc.? And she laughed. And she was like, no, my dream is seeing my kids love music. And when she
Yeah.
has a former piano player say, I took up ballroom dance, she's like, I succeeded. I totally succeeded. And she
Yeah.
said expansive childhood. And that I think
I,
you're missing expansive when you have intensive.
no, I wrote that word down. I love the idea of expansive because in a lot of ways, and you make this point very powerfully, is that rather than expanding our kids, vision of the world, we're narrowing it. We're narrowing it down to baseball, period. There or whatever it may be, music. I happen to play the violin. So I mean, I played the violin, not great, to put it that way, according to my wife. But anyway, the, but I loved it, and now today I do. I love classical music. I love music in general, but I happen to be like classical music a lot. You mentioned this idea of the travel team trap. The Can you explain that and warn people why this is a trap?
Yes, and so this goes beyond specialization because we've covered that already. But the idea that if your kid's good at all, or if you want them to be good, you got to put them on the travel team. That the rec team is not good enough. I once had a guy say, "Oh, well, that league is fine, but the coaches are all just volunteer dads." And I thought that's me. He's talking about what's wrong with that? But that they and so then the travel team, it becomes a trap because it's not just parents who are obsessed with a D1 scholarship or trying to live vicariously through their son or daughter. It's people who say, "Oh, well, I just want him to be able to try out for JV." And the JV coach says you have to play travel if you want to have a chance. Or just everybody else does it. Or the travel coach says, "Oh, your daughter's really good at goalie in lacrosse. Let's put her on the travel team." And so parents sort of back into this. In addition to the harms to the kids of specialization, there is the fact that it disrupts family culture. If you're going to Delaware every other weekend, especially if you have or consider having more than one kid, it totally disrupts things. Now, if you were blessed with only one child and you want to take these road trips to your kids, I know people who say it works out great for them. But in general, it exhausts the family. I had one dad tell me about swimming, which is sort of inherently life consuming. He said, I thought as a father that my wife and I would control our family's schedule, but our swim coach determines our family schedule. And so that it really is not great for family culture, in addition to putting high pressure on kids at a young age.
You know what? Well put. And this is something I think that, I will tell you just that we fell into that to a degree. Our kids had some proclivities to certain sports, and we did fall into some of that travel team thing. And it was, on one hand, the kids, it wasn't all bad, but I will tell you that it was very highly disruptive to the family in many many ways. So it's a good point. And those listening out there, please consider your life and who's determining your schedule, because sometimes it's not yours. I want to move on to another chapter. You have a chapter entitled "Hey Parents, Leave Your Kids Alone," and you talk about losing one of your kids. I found this to be, and you put this in a positive light. So can you explain yourself again?
Yeah. So my youngest son, Sean, um, I guess to go in chronological order, there was one day we were at a nature center and all of us left, me and this other dad and a bunch of kids left to go for a walk through the woods. And we stayed behind with the youngest, and the kids all ran ahead. And we thought Sean ran ahead, and Sean didn't. And he stayed in the nature center. And it took me about half an hour to realize he was missing. And my son will say, I never ran so fast as when I threw the baby to my friend and grabbed Charlie, and we sprinted back and called the police and called my wife. And I hesitated half a second before each of those calls. I did the calls in the other order because I just thought, am I going to get murdered by my wife, or am I going to get arrested by the police? But both of them I knew I had to call. And calling my wife was right. She sprung into action. And calling the police, they said, we just got a report. We have your son. He's fine. But then my terror was the trouble I was going to get into, even though I had a story that made sense and I didn't get into trouble. But then as I started studying this sort of thing, I found lots of people absolutely do. They leave their kid at home while they run to their corner store. They let their child walk to a park and back. Or like me, they think their kid's somewhere else and they walk away. And they
Yeah.
get in legal trouble because we have these helicopter mandates. I have a second time I lost Sean in the book, and then I have a third time I lost Sean. And the third time it was in the Marine Corps Museum in Quantico, Virginia. And so I'd already lost him that weekend, and the phone rings, and on my caller ID on my cell phone, it says Quantico, Virginia, U.S. Marines. And the cop who stopped the Marine who stopped them from exiting was like, you have the danger is your son persuaded me, your 8-year-old talked me into thinking, oh, maybe I should let him just walk out into the parking lot and look for his family, even though he wasn't there. But in all of these places where I lost them, they were ultimately safe. So I don't like take my kids into the middle of Newark in at midnight. I don't take them out sea kayaking and don't care if I lose them there. A lot of parenting is bringing them, putting them in an environment where if they get lost, they'll be okay, and
Yeah.
knowing that getting lost is part of an expansive childhood.
Okay, Tim Carney, that's a great thing. Listen, I will give you a little bit of slack here. You have 6 kids, and it's kind of tough to keep track, be counting noses all the time. Sometimes, I mean, listen, this fortunately was not me, but my wife famously left one of our kids at the barbershop. And she thought everyone had jumped in the car. One of them
Yeah.
had not jumped in the car. And I don't know how far it was, but she kind of realized, oh my gosh, where's that? Where's one of our
Yeah.
kids? She went back. The child was fine. Everyone in the barbershop was actually enjoying our daughter. But anyway, it was a little bit embarrassing to my lovely wife, who has never quite lived it down. But when you have a bunch of kids, sometimes you do lose count.
Yeah.
So listen, I want to get in. I'm watching our time here, and I want to. There are a couple other things I want to talk about real briefly. One of them is this idea that I love this chapter title. If you want fecundity in the sheets, give us walkability in the streets. Okay. Fecundity in the sheets sounds like fun to me. But anyway, go ahead and tell us about what does that mean?
So fecundity means fertility, having babies. I think that the unwalkability, let me put it another way, the car dependence of our neighborhoods drives down the birth rate. And that if a kid can't have fun without you driving him somewhere. If a kid can't walk around because there's 3 lanes of traffic going in both directions everywhere, then parents need to be active and directly involved and laboring for everything that the kids do. And so if you remember growing up and riding your bike around town until the streetlights turned on, you realize that wasn't just liberating for you, that was liberating for your parents. And so more walkable neighborhoods will be pro family in all sorts of ways. And wandering around is good for kids' mental health, I believe. You can tell me whether you agree. But it'll also be good for parents. And it's easier to have 6 kids. I'm looking out the window right now, and one of my kids is shooting hoops on the cul-de-sac. I know that 2 other kids just walk down to the next neighborhood, and so if your kids can just wander, then their childhood is happier, and you as a parent can handle it more because you're not managing every minute of their day.
Yeah. The word you use is card hell. Car hell.
Car hell.
And
Yep.
car hell. I can't agree more. And I live in Los Angeles and a suburb of Santa Monica. And you know what? I look out my window and I see traffic. I see cars zipping by, and God forbid you get in front of one of those things, you're toast. So I agree that it has become, we, especially LA. I mean, we have built this city. I guess they, because I didn't build it, but they have built the city for the car, not for people. That's my point. You mentioned housing too, and this is something, just briefly. Tell us about, because you mentioned that living next door to grandma and grandpa is a good thing, and is
Mhm.
becoming more and more difficult to do because of housing prices and rents and everything else. Speak to that a little bit, if you would.
So it's actually, I mean, the in the book, as you can tell, I tell a lot of personal stories and I make arguments to some extent in the later chapters from my values, but there's like 500 footnotes with lots of social science research in there. And one of the surprising things I found, I mean, I wasn't surprised. I just found that somebody did a study on this. If you get help from mom or dad raising your first child, you're more likely to have a second child. And if you get help from your mom or dad when you're raising your second child, you're more likely to have a third child, and so on. That seems totally obvious, but it's not something we think about. How can you make a more family friendly culture? Well, somehow, if you got more people to live walking distance from their parents. So where we just bought in Northern Virginia is a very short drive from grandma and grandpa. We're more at the stage now where us and our older children are helping them. But then we're also 2 blocks from my sister-in-law, and we and our kids, again, there's lots of benefit going back and forth. Israel has the highest birth rate of any wealthy country, and that's not just the religious. One of the things about Israel is 70% of mothers get help from their own parents. It's 35% in Europe. And
Yeah.
so why is that more value? A, you don't have to pay like a nanny. Um, B, it's just you don't you can call on them at any minute. Also knowing that maybe they'll say no and then that your feelings aren't going to be hurt. And just nothing replaces family is the bottom line. You would pay the services provided by having mom be close by when you have a newborn are something you would pay $50,000 a year for if you could afford it.
Well put. I will tell you that one reason why my wife and I had the number of children we had is because my mother-in-law was a young widow, and so she was able to. She had more time, and she was able to come and help our family, help my wife, and just kind of be there. She would come after the child was born, and be there for months at a time. And I have to tell you, my mother-in-law Christine, who's now living in heaven, she made the difference, and that's a big reason why we had a big family. So
Mhm.
you're absolutely correct, certainly in my experience, that it makes a big difference. You mentioned Israel. Can you tell us a little bit more about Israel, because I think this is important. I've been to Israel, you've been to Israel. Israel is an outlier, and I think that partly it is the culture of family
Mhm.
is so much more profound. And when I first went to Israel, I will tell you that it was a little bit of a throwback. I felt like I was stepping back into time, because you wander through Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or wherever you are, and you see kids and families everywhere. Kids are part of the culture. Can you maybe go in, kind of dig down into that, into Israel and why it's unique?
I mean, I spend a whole chapter on it in the book because it's got a lot going on. But just to point out some things, Europe's total fertility rate a couple years ago, when I was working on this book, was 1.5 children per woman is what they would expect over their whole lifetime. Israel's was 3.0, so twice the rest of Europe. And then the shocking thing was that secular Jews in Israel, so these are the people I interviewed who were eating like bacon wrapped shrimp out on a Saturday night or Friday night in Tel Aviv.
Yeah,
Literally, they had a
not
shrimp
exactly,
burger.
not exactly kosher to
Yes.
do all that, right? Okay, got it.
And so they have 2.0, which is obviously lower than the religious. But the United States, if we imported the secular Jews from Israel, our birth rate would go up because we're at 1.6. And so it's not just that. Well, a couple of religious people said, well, yeah, it's the first commandment, the mitzvah, be fruitful and multiply. That matters. But what happens is it trickles out. There's multiple factors. One guy said, God has no role in my family planning. He's secular Jew in Israel, 3 kids. And he said, well, you got to keep the tribe going. So there's the Israeli sense of being a people that multiple times there have been credible efforts to stop them from continuing to exist.
Yeah,
And it's they're present in the current in the current geopolitics, obviously. All of those things add up. But then what the culture that gets built because of them affects people who don't even care about those things. So one guy put it, the bus drivers in Israel have a special affection for kids. So imagine that you let your 6-year-old walk to school because you know that the strangers will help them cross the street because it's normal. And because if they have to hop on the city bus at 8, the bus driver will see them there and say, okay, come on, now tell me exactly where you're going. All right, that's 5 stops. Let's count them together. Like, and just the way neighborhoods are built, Tel Aviv is super packed. They have a housing shortage, but people still have kids. Why? Well, new housing is going up, and there's a playground right in the middle of it.
yeah.
And the parents all gather around the playground. So you have instant friends because there's a playground outside your door. And they build things that way, and they build the culture that way. And if you have your kids in the restaurant, nobody's going to look at you funny. So everything about the culture says, come on, send us your kids.
You know what? And I love that. I mean, because everywhere you go, and I think that even at workplaces, they actually bring their kids to work in a much more frequent manner than we do. And I'm talking about being
Yep.
right there with them in the workaday life, and that's so powerful for kids, and for wanting kids and actually exposing kids to other people. I one of the things of noteworthy. I just want to comment here briefly that I noted last month or two that our U.S. fertility rate has now dropped to the lowest ever, as you mentioned, 1.6, which is abysmal, really. Replacement, of course, is 2.1. But the reality is that you look at that and you kind of go, what's going on? And I'm watching our time here. I want to finish up with your last chapter, which you call the sad civilization. Um, I don't want to end on a depressing note, but I want you to kind of dig through that chapter if you would, and and tell us a little bit about your thoughts about that.
Civilizational sadness is the belief that we are not good. We being whatever, humans, wealthy Western world, uh, whatever it is. I think that I use as a contrast to that the baby boom. Our men came home from just having saved the world from 2 evil empires. Our women greeted them on the pier, just having kept the economy running for 4 years. And they smooch on the pier, get married, and have a ton of kids. Why? And it wasn't just Jamaica. It was amazing what the baby boom, earlier marriage, more kids, less childlessness. Why? I argue that a huge part of that was that right then, more than any time before or since, we knew that we were good, and that idea is gone. There wasn't a baby boom in Germany, Japan, or Italy. In fact, they led the world in the second half of the 20th century baby bust. And I think that had to do with a perception that they weren't good. I think that attitude of post World War II Germany now has trickled into most of the educated Western world. We've given up God, we've become secular, and whatever's replaced organized religion is something that preaches a lot more guilt and fear and fire and brimstone than any Southern Baptist preacher ever did.
Yeah.
And
No,
it
and
makes us
you know
think
what?
that
Well put. You're absolutely true. I grew up in a Baptist church, so I know the preaching. And you're absolutely right. If you turn on, if you watch the news, there's a lot of fire and brimstone coming out, including
you're all
climate
going to
change.
burn. You don't want to bring kids into this world. Your kids are wretched, and then the world they'll be born into will be wretched.
It's a bigger carbon footprint, my friend, is what it is.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Amazing. Well, you know what? We need to fight back, and you are fighting back, Tim Carney. The book, by the way, friends, is called Family Unfriendly. There is a picture of the cover of the book. This is a fabulous book. And Tim, we're going to finish right here, but I just want to say, first of all, thank you for having common sense. You have a lot of common sense. Thanks for having 6 kids. I do feel lonely out there in this world, so it's nice to have someone who shares a lot of losing children and losing losing my mind sometimes. But it's been good. It's been great actually. So, and friends, thank you for tuning in today to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. This has been a great conversation with Tim Carney. Again, pick up his book. It's called Family Unfriendly: How Our Culture Made Raising Kids Much Harder Than It Needs to Be, and it's so true. Tim, again, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And friends, thank you for being here too. Until next time, be well. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of your day. Tune in again next week on Apple Podcast. Rate and comment and tell a friend.